Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into the warm, dust-kissed heart of ancient Babylon, where time, as you know it, doesn't come in digital digits or ticking hands, but rather glides slowly across the earth in the form of a shadow. The sun overhead is relentless, the heat dry and golden, and somewhere in the middle of a marketplace, a child stops to squint at the shadow cast by a stick. That, apparently, means it's time for lunch. You probably wouldn't survive a week here. Between deciphering celestial calendars and remembering that the year doesn't start in January, your head might just spin faster than the stars. But don't worry, you won't need to do any math tonight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing just outside the northern wall of Babylon, around 1750 BCE. There's a low hum of city life around you, braying donkeys, the slap of bare feet on dry clay roads, and the constant chitter of commerce. The scent is unmistakable, earth, baked bread, and something like warm copper in the air. Babylon, even in its prime, isn't as pristine as textbooks would have you believe, but it is alive, vital, and obsessed with shadows. The walls are massive, built in courses of sun-baked mud brick and plastered with that stubborn beige color that manages to both reflect light and absorb centuries. You walk through the Ishtar Gate, impressive, even in its early iterations, with its animal motifs and cobalt tiles, stepping into a city that considers itself the axis of the universe. You pass market stalls groaning under the weight of dates, dried fish, and goatskins of something fermenting that might be wine or vinegar.
No clocks, no bells.
Time is read in architecture and instinct.
The sun, high in the sky, casts angular shadows across alleyways.
Everything is measured in relation to that brightness. When the shadows shorten, bakers pull their bread from clay ovens. When they stretch out long and lean, scribes pack up their clay tablets and call it a day. There's no atomic precision, but there's a rhythm here that feels oddly reliable. You can almost hear it in the cadence of the city. Pause, shift, resume. A priest in rust-colored robes hurries past you, balancing a basket of what appears to be cuneiform tablets.
His destination? The temple ziggurat rising in the distance.
It's a layered terraced mountain of mud brick and will be your recurring backdrop, because everything, including time itself, seems to orbit around that structure.
The ziggurat isn't just a monument. It's a calendar, a cosmic antenna.
And, on sunny days, a really good place to check the hour.
You notice the shadows again.
They fall like compass needles, unwavering and deliberate. A child squats beside a crooked stick planted into a square of packed dirt, tracing lines in the dust with a fingertip. This is an omen, not that anyone calls it that yet, and the boy's lines aren't random. He's marking the sun's path like a seasoned timekeeper. Time in Babylon is solar, yes, but also seasonal, agricultural, and spiritual. It's not about punctuality so much as harmony. You don't show up at 3 p.m. You arrive when the shadow hits the barley line, or when it finally touches the second temple stair. Mainstream historians generally agree that Babylonian society functioned on a lunisolar calendar. Months followed the cycles of the moon, while agricultural seasons were governed by solar events, like solstices and equinoxes, discerned with painstaking shadow tracking. But how precisely they calibrated daily timekeeping with these cycles? Historians still argue whether they had formal hourly divisions or simply relied on intuitive shadow markers. There's no Babylonian Apple Watch, after all. What's clear is that the Babylonians didn't just watch shadows, they studied them. Temple astronomers, who doubled as mathematicians, made meticulous records of sun angles at different times of the year. These records weren't casual observations, they were state-level data. The king's daily schedule? Based on these. Agricultural feasts and offerings? Timed to celestial perfection, or so they hoped. And then there's the quirks, because Babylon, for all its glory, had its fair share of oddities. Take the festival days, for example. Some sources suggest that if the sun cast no visible shadow at noon, a rare event, mostly in midsummer, it was taken as an omen that the gods were watching too closely. People stayed indoors, prayers doubled, and meat was avoided, because nothing says divine scrutiny like a suspicious lack of shadows. Your sandals crunch on fine gravel as you follow a group of teenagers, apprentices, maybe, toward a smaller ziggurat outpost where a sundial is etched into the temple courtyard floor. It's rudimentary, a raised stone pillar surrounded by carved concentric arcs. As the shadow moves, it touches glyphs that translate loosely into time markers. Morning prayer, midday meal, evening bath. You glance upward. The sun hangs heavily in a cloudless sky.
You feel it on your scalp, your shoulders.
Time doesn't tick here, it presses down.
In the distance, a bronze gong sounds once.
Not to mark an hour, but to call the high priest to a solar alignment ceremony. Timing is critical, not just for the god's approval, but for the alignment of city functions. Commerce, worship, even waste disposal, a job performed with suspicious regularity around sunset. You turn a corner and nearly trip over a sleeping dog. No one rushes in Babylon. There's no need. Everyone knows time here. It's right there, etched in light and stone and shadow.
You pause in a doorway, letting your eyes adjust to the shadow. Inside, the floor is cooler, the air calmer.
Outside, the shadows stretch by degrees. Tiny, imperceptible adjustments that slowly, surely, remind every citizen where they are in the day, and who's really in charge.
Spoiler, it's the sun.
And its trusty sidekick, the shadow. Its mathematical rigor is still very much a place where guesswork mingles freely with divine interpretation. You've wandered now into a quieter part of the city, where a low wall encircles a patch of hardened clay earth. There's no market noise here, just the faint sound of sandals scuffing and birds calling from the rooftop gardens above. At the center of the space, planted carefully into the ground, stands what looks like a glorified stick.
But don't laugh.
That stick, known later by the Greeks as an omen, is a serious piece of technology here in Babylon. And like everything in this city, its placement isn't random. You crouch beside it, noting the delicate lines scratched around its base. These lines radiate like sunbeams frozen in the ground, though some are clearly redrawn again and again. A young acolyte stands nearby, his face dappled with sweat, holding a stylus and a lump of clay. He watches the shadow, marks it, then waits.
Again. Again.
There is no rush. Babylon doesn't need minutes. It has shadows and patience. Here's the thing, shadows aren't just a curiosity. They're essential. Everything from when to bake bread to when to offer incense hinges on where the sun lands. Without clocks, time is a negotiation between sky and earth. Miss the right shadow, and you're out of step, not just with your chores, but with the cosmos. And perhaps worse, with your mother-in-law. You notice that the shadow has moved, barely, but enough for the boy to tap his tablet and mutter something under his breath. You lean in to eavesdrop, but his Sumerian-Akkadian blend leaves you lost somewhere between now and soonish. Mainstream fact time. Babylonian timekeeping is one of the earliest known systems to blend observational astronomy with practical scheduling. Their city-wide routines were driven not by hours on a dial, but by the sun's arc and seasonal shadow changes. That little stick wasn't alone. Temples kept their own gnomons, and shadow paths were referenced like public notice boards. But here's a quirky truth you probably didn't learn in school. Babylonian shadow readers often gave names to different times of day, not by numerical hours, but by metaphor. The shadow that points to the goat pen might mean early morning, while when the fig tree sleeps could be dusk.
Poetic, yes. Confusing?
Absolutely. But somehow it works. Historians still argue whether these metaphorical phrases were standard across the empire or more like local dialects. Grandpa time slang, if you will. One tablet from Mari references the sun scratching the vulture's perch, and scholars still can't agree if it means noon or just a bad day for vultures. You're handed a stylus now. The young scribe gestures for you to try. You hesitate, then kneel down, eyeing the slowly shrinking shadow. With your best guess, you press into the soft clay, awkwardly etching a mark next to his. He looks at your work, squints, and gives a small nod.
Not terrible. In this moment, you realize the meeting. Time, here, isn't a taskmaster. It's a companion.
It whispers instead of yells. You don't chase it, it nudges you forward. A priest nearby adjusts the gnomon slightly, muttering about heavenly corrections. Apparently, the last one leaned too far during the rainy season and began telling time for a city 2 provinces away. You retreat to the edge of the courtyard as a bell-less shift change ripples through the temple staff.
The shadows lengthen, the RHYTHM shifts.
A group of women carrying woven baskets of herbs pass by, gossiping softly in an Akkadian dialect. One laughs and says something that sounds suspiciously like late again. You don't ask how they know. Overhead, the sky is beginning to lean toward gold.
You follow the path of Ars Lenting beam as it touches the first step of the ziggurat.
That, apparently, means it's time for the evening prayers, or possibly dinner.
Babylon is flexible like that.
Here's a closing image to hold in your mind, a sprawling city without ticking clocks, where time lives in walls, courtyards and temple steps. Where a stick in the ground could tell fortunes, signal a festival, or just remind someone to stop working and go home. Time here isn't counted. It's watched. And as you walk back toward the marketplace, you find yourself glancing at shadows, not out of curiosity, but out of habit. They're not just telling time. They're telling stories. Of curiosity now, but out of habit. You're learning slowly to read time the Babylonian way. The streets are more animated as the golden haze thickens. Vendors pack up their wares, children tug at their mother's robes, and in a narrow alley, a clay tablet vendor desperately tries to sell a nearly fresh astrological chart before dusk. You turn down a quieter path, drawn by the scent of baked barley and something earthy, possibly goat. Ahead lies a modest home, unremarkable except for the narrow slit in its outer wall, angled just so.
It's a Stern Shadow Box Stern. A humble household version of the Temple's Grand Gnomon.
In Babylon, even ordinary folks dabble in shadow tracking. You duck into the courtyard, where an elderly man lounges with a bowl of fermented date drink. He gestures vaguely at the wall and says, "That mark?"
Time for dinner. The next one? My wife yells.
You chuckle politely, but your eyes are drawn to the box.
A narrow shaft of sunlicht pierces trug, streaking a scratch mark along the interior wall.
Like a sundial without the dial, it records a single, sacred interval. Maybe the moment his son returns from the fields, or when his prayers begin. Whatever it is, the shadow confirms it. Time has arrived. This personal form of timekeeping fascinates you. Unlike the temple's communal gnomon, this is hyperlocal.
Custom-made.
It's the ancient equivalent of programming your smartwatch to buzz when the sourdough is ready.
Mainstream fact?
These home shadow devices were often aligned with a family's specific needs, not the broader city rhythm. Scholars believe they may have been adjusted seasonally with a household calendar, which included market days, religious rites, and harvest cycles. It's not unlike how we tweak our calendars today, less lunar month and more when cousin visits. Here's a quirky twist. Some Babylonian homes included built-in niches for light tracking, designed into the bricks themselves. A beam of sunlight passing through a tiny window might illuminate a particular floor tile, an accidental feature, or a genius way to signal bath time. Historians are still debating whether these alignments were intentional architectural design or just lucky sunbeams. You sip from the date drink the old man offers. It's alarmingly sour, with a hint of honey and something unidentifiable. Possibly fermented fig?
Possibly shoe?
But it's polite to smile and sip again. He begins to tell you a story slowly, the way elders do. How his grandfather once missed the shadow mark and ruined an entire grain offering. How the gods forgive, but not the temple cooks.
You laug, and he waves you onward, pointing you toward the ziggurat ensemble.
The sky is deepening, the city humming softer. You find yourself climbing the temple stairs, drawn by a whisper of flute music and the distant smell of burning resin. Up here, the shadows stretch and tangle like lazy cats. On the upper terrace, astronomer priests murmur over tables and tablets, comparing notes. Not just shadow lengths now, but stars. Because Babylon doesn't just track time by day. It tracks time by night too. A second kind of gnomon, celestial, this time. You're about to enter the realm of star clocks.
But not yet. You pause here, letting the breeze cool your skin. Below, the city glows in dusty golds and cooling blues.
Somewhere, someone bangs a bronze pot, either a signal or a dinner argument.
You smile.
This, you realize, is the rhythm of a world before minutes. A time of shadows and silence, soft cues and human-scale precision.
Therese no rush here.
Just the slow drift of light across stone, marking lives in slivers.
And as you descend the ziggurat stairs, your own shadow leading the way, you notice the meeting.
You're starting to believe it too. You descend carefully, each sun-warmed brick underfoot still holding a whisper of the day's heat. The steps of the ziggurat are steep and slightly worn, like the knees of an old scribe, polished by centuries of quiet ascents. Below you, the city is mellowing, its clamor hushed by the thickening twilight. But as the last rays stretch and warp the shadows around you, something shifts.
The light is fading. The sundials go mute.
And the Babylonians, ever attuned, turn their eyes upward. Night is not an end, it is a shift. And with it, a new system of time awakens.
You make your way through narrow streets, where torchlight flickers against mud brick walls.
Eventually, you arrive at a flat rooftop, one of many scattered across the city, where a small team of temple apprentices sits cross-legged beneath a deepening indigo sky. One of them, barely more than a boy, invites you to join them. You accept with a nod, sinking onto a reed mat that crackles beneath your weight. In front of you, a wax tablet glows faintly in the firelight. Upon it, star names, sketches of constellations, and carefully drawn boxes, segments of the night, counted not in hours, but in stars rising.
This is the Stern Star Clockstern.
Mainstream historians agree. Babylonians divided the night into intervals based on when certain stars rose on the eastern horizon. These weren't abstract points on a dial. They were vivid, shining timepieces, each one tied to a specific temporal window.
The fox star appears.
That's third watch.
See the lion's paw?
That's when the priests must begin chanting. This celestial tracking was not only practical, it was divine.
Von Apprentice points towards the horizon.
Watch, he whispers.
Enten, emerging from the purple black beyond, a point of light blinks into view.
Others follow, one by one, until a graceful arc of stars hangs above you.
The boy quietly notices the time, beginning of the fourth watch.
His voice is reverent, almost sleepy. You realize that to these people, time doesn't tick, it shimmers. The Babylonians, unlike us, didn't obsess over precision down to the second.
They measured moments, shifts,
sacred alignments. This sky reading wasn't just science, it was scripture. It whispered what to do, when to pray, when to sleep. In many ways, it ruled more gently, but more profoundly than any king. You ask a sleepy question. What happens if the stars are obscured?
Clouds? Sandstorm?
Sneaky owl with a vendetta? The oldest apprentice, without looking up, says, then we wait.
Or we guess. Sometimes the stars forgive us.
A gentle joke, but real. Scholars today still argue whether these star clocks had fallback methods, backup rituals or observational substitutes for cloudy nights. Some propose that a faint understanding of lunar phases or even auditory cues from nature, like frog songs or bird migrations, filled in the blanks. But no one knows for sure. Here's the oddball fact. Some Babylonian star clocks weren't just for one season, they rotated.
That's right.
These ancient astronomers had seasonal star charts. Different constellations served as time markers depending on the time of year. Imagine if our wall clocks changed faces every few months, depending on the flavor of pumpkin spice in the air.
From the rooftop, you gaze eastward again.
A new point of light begins its climb. A star once associated with Nergal, the god of war and plague.
Charming. The boy beside you taps the tablet again.
This one means it's nearly time for morning offerings.
You stiefle Aion.
And time to wake the temple cook, he adds with a grin. You notice how effortlessly they transition from one time system to the next.
Da Utime belongs to the shadow. Night to the stars.
And between them lies a seamless bridge, one moment flowing into another like water between stones. As the night deepens, so too does the hush. Even the insects have settled. One of the apprentices begins a low, repetitive chant, something about a lion and a barley field, and you find your eyelids growing heavy. But just as you begin to drift, you remember something odd the old man said, some stars lie. You ask softly, what did he mean?
The apprentice shrugs.
Sometimes they rise earlier. Sometimes later.
Depends on your eyes.
Depends on the gods. He smiles mysteriously. And depends on how much date wine you drank. You laugh, too loudly for this hour. A passing priest shushes you. You mime zipping your mouth with a reed stylus. The priest doesn't laugh, but the apprentices do.
Another moment, another rising star.
You lie back now, cradled by the rooftop warmth, as Babylon rotates gently beneath the sky.
It's not just shadows anymore. It's starlight.
An ancient city in sync with the celestial rhythm.
You're not wetting time.
You're floating through it. Had at supper, the apprentice finishes with a wink, before trailing off into a low chuckle. The others grin, but no one laughs too loud. After all, the stars are watching.
You lie back on the rooftop, the woven reed mat pressing gently into your shoulders, the sky yawning open up over you.
It's easy to forget you're in a bustling city, one that never truly sleeps, because up here, the world narrows to a dome of dark velvet and pinprick light. But your story isn't finished.
Far from it.
Because when the stars fade and the horizon blushes with the first sigh of dawn, a different kind of timekeeping begins. One powered not by shadows or starlight, but by sound.
The soft toll of a copper bell marks the change.
You sit up, blinking.
Some wäre below, temple attendants are waking the fires.
The morning offering must be prepared with mathematical precision, and to achieve that, the Babylonians rely on another tool in their timekeeping arsenal, the water clock. Known to scholars as a clepsydra, the Babylonian water clock is both delightfully simple and maddeningly complex. Picture a wide-brimmed ceramic bowl, thick, sun-baked, painted with faint markings inside.
At the bottom, a pinhole.
You pour water in, and it trickles out, slowly lowering the surface. Each line inside the bowl marks a specific passage of time, calculated with startling accuracy.
In theory.
But here's the quirky part. These clocks didn't always tick in perfect rhythm. The speed of flow depended on temperature, water purity, and even the shape of the hole.
Hot day, faster drip. Cold night, slower trickle.
It's the original, your mileage may vary. Historians still debate whether these water clocks were standardized. Some argue they were finely tuned by expert artisans, used in courts and temples for scheduling rituals or astrological observations. Others suggest they were more like a kitchen timer, practical, approximate, and occasionally prone to mischief if someone nudged the table. One account even mentions a priest accused of tampering with the clepsydra to shorten another's prayer time.
Petty?
Absolutely. But time, even then, was political. You're invited to watch one in action. A priestess sets a fresh bowl beside a bronze basin. The water glistens as it pours in, surface trembling like the skin of a fruit. You crouch beside her, marveling at the calm reverence with which she studies each droplet's descent. Every few minutes, she gently taps the side, then scratches a mark onto a wax tablet. Her assistant notes the intervals.
They do this not once, but 7 times.
This isn't a demonstration, it's calibration. Later, in the temple's inner chamber, these water clocks mark more than time. They measure the cadence of worship.
AHYMN muss last a full bowl.
A smoke offering must be lit before the third drop reaches the fish symbol. It's part schedule, part sacred geometry. And just when you think Babylonian timekeeping can't get any more elaborate, a temple scribe pulls out a small, rectangular tablet and begins calculating planetary hours. These aren't literal hours like ours, but more like mood swings of the cosmos. 1 hour is ruled by Mars, aggressive, don't schedule weddings. The next by Venus, flirty, great for perfume sales. Think of it as astrology meets Eichel. The scribe jots down symbols, muttering the names of gods in between. This is a Saturn hour, he murmurs. Good for boundaries, bad for celebrations. You can't help but think how much smoother your last office meeting might have gone if you'd checked the astral calendar first. But Babylonian scheduling wasn't just about rituals and planets. It was woven into the city's everyday rhythms. When the granary opened, when children fetched water, when the market gates clanged open. Everything followed the celestial script. And unlike today, there were no alarms, no buzzing phones.
Just bells, birdsong, and the soft drip 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 of time falling, one drop at a time.
Here's a lesser-known tidbit. Some Babylonian water clocks doubled as night lamps.
That's right.
A small wick floated atop the water surface, burning gently as the level lowered. It gave off just enough glow to read a star chart or find her sandals, but not enough to wake a sleeping scribe.
Multifunktional.
Martha Stewart would be proud. Back on the rooftop, the apprentices have begun to stir. The star clock is quiet now, its job done. The horizon is painted with a kind of pink only poets and overly enthusiastic fresco artists could appreciate. Time, once again, has changed costumes. You stretch, yawn, and feel your spine pop in a satisfying way that would have horrified a priest of Nabu. The clepsydra ticks gently beside you. And as the sun prepares to rise, you remember what the apprentice said earlier.
So muss das lie.
So does water, you think. Or at least, it stretches the truth, trickling away your night one sleepy second at a time. Is done for the day. As the last stars fade into a sky turning the color of overcooked porridge, the rooftop becomes noisy with yawns, gentle complaints, and the creak of wooden sandals. Someone spills a little water from a jar and mutters an apology to the gods. Timekeeping, after all, is a sacred business. You stretch, feeling the bones in your spine crack like sun-dried clay. The rooftop, with its humble mats and giddy stargazers, dissolves behind you as you descend the mud-brick stairs. It's time to see how the rest of the city keeps its clocks. In Babylon, time isn't simply tracked. It's carved, etched into walls, pressed into clay, and memorized in song. Walk through the temple district, and you'll pass scribes bent over cuneiform tablets, each line a testament to some minute, harvest schedules, legal contracts, planetary alignments. They're not just writing stories, they're building calendars. One scribe explains how time is encoded in Babylonian law. There are days you may marry, he says, tapping his stylus against a fresh slab, and days when you may not even sneeze near your betrothed. He's only half joking. The calendar determines everything from fasting to festivals to fines for lazy irrigation. And if you're wondering whether these calendars were based on logic or superstition, well, yes. You peek into a nearby schoolroom, a dusty chamber where young scribes in training copy dates onto wax tablets. One boy frowns as he puzzles over a riddle. If the moon is full, and Ishtar's priest has fasted thrice, when must the barley be sown? It's part math, part magic, and definitely more complicated than your old high school planner. But this is no chaotic guessing game. The Babylonians had a lunisolar calendar. Months based on moon phases, years balanced with solar cycles. A year might have 12 or sometimes 13 months, depending on how kindly the sun and moon play together. Keeping it all aligned required a class of specialist scholars known as baru, diviners who read omens in livers and skies alike. Historians still argue whether these calendar adjustments were scientific or mystical. Were they tracking solstices by observation, or just going with their gut and a goat liver? Either way, the results were strangely consistent. It's why Babylon's calendar system influenced others for centuries. Even the ancient Greeks gave it a respectful nod. Here's a delightfully odd fringe fact. One Babylonian king, Nabu-Nasir, was so obsessed with cleaning up his timekeeping system that he erased all records before his reign. Year zero, he declared, with all the subtlety of someone rage-deleting their inbox. Imagine if your boss started a new fiscal year by erasing all previous spreadsheets, and then carved it in stone. You find yourself in a bakery, the sweet scent of date cakes drifting through the early heat. The baker nods a greeting while rhythmically kneading dough, timing it by the rhythm of a temple chant floating in from down the road.
No timers here. Just memory, muscle, and music.
When the fourth stanza ends, I roll, he says.
If he go too long, the breed talks back.
In the marketplace, time is tracked not by clocks but by sun and shadow. Merchants place canopies to avoid direct glare. When the shade reaches a certain step, they pack up. One man shows you a stone marker on the ground, worn smooth by thousands of footsteps. This, he says, is the second hour of trade. The stone doesn't move, but the light around it dances a quiet ballet across the dust. Want something even more niche? Meet the temple runners, young men whose job is to relay time updates from one part of the city to another. Fast-footed and sharp-eyed, they dart through alleys and over rooftops to announce the 6th hour, or the beginning of a ritual. Their timing is precise, often measured against shadow marks or the length of chants. One runner grins as he boasts, "I once beat the sun to the ziggurat." And if all this sounds overly precise for a civilization without wristwatches, consider this. The Babylonians were among the first to divide the day into 24 hours. That's right. The same system your phone uses to nag you about screen time came from these desert-dwelling mathematicians. They also split each hour into 60 minutes and each minute into 60 seconds. Why? Because 60 is divisible by lots of numbers, a math nerd's dream.
So here you are, standing in a bustling square, feeling the city pulse around you like a living sundial.
Time, here, is a rhythm more than a rule. It flows through prayers, markets, songs, and silence. It bends around rivers and climbs up ziggurats. It isn't shouted, it's whispered. The sun crests the rooftops, and suddenly it's mid-morning.
A vendor shoots. A child laus. A bell rings sommewere in the temple.
You close your eyes and listen, not for noise but for timing. In Babylon, everything runs on time. It just doesn't always wear a watch. A fantastically cooperative number. You can divide it neatly by 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. That makes it perfect for fractions, which, if you're a Babylonian, are the seasoning of the mathematical stew. You're not just counting goats, you're calculating the angle of Venus at dusk, or figuring how many barley cakes can be made from half a bushel in 3/4 of a moon.
60 helps. It always helps.
Your steps take you through one of the city's quieter lanes, where the walls are high and the windows are little more than eye-shaped slits.
Here, behind the thick bricks, live the astronomer priests.
Their job is to watch the sky and keep the calendar sane. You can't see them, but you can hear them, murmuring incantations, rustling papyrus scrolls, the occasional frustrated groan when a cloud ruins the night's data.
These scholars tracked the stars with astounding patience.
Night after night, they recorded where Jupiter appeared, how Mars wandered, what Venus was up to. Over years, decades even, they built astronomical tables that would humble a modern spreadsheet. Patterns emerged. They learned to predict eclipses with uncanny accuracy. And here's the kicker. They did it all without telescopes.
No lenses, no magnification.
Just trained eyes, steady hands, and enough neck strain to make a chiropractor weep. One tablet, recovered near Nineveh, contains observations so detailed that modern astronomers could use them to retrocalculate lunar orbits. It's like stumbling across a prehistoric NASA, minus the coffee breaks. Historians still debate just how much of their astronomy was science versus symbolism. Were they chasing celestial mechanics or celestial messages? To a Babylonian, there wasn't always a difference. If Saturn dimmed, maybe a war was coming. If the moon's horns curved just so, it might be a good time to plant onions. As above, so below, they'd say, shrugging like someone trying to explain why Mercury being in retrograde means your sandals keep breaking. The Enuma Anu Enlil, a collection of omens etched in tablet after tablet, offered guidance on everything from rainfall to royal succession. These omens weren't just consulted in times of panic, they were a daily ritual, a rhythm for the city's life. Before launching a building project or declaring a festival, someone somewhere had to check if Jupiter was in a friendly mood. And here's a fringe detail you probably didn't expect. The Babylonians had water clocks too. Simple devices, a bowl with a hole, a jar that filled slowly. By measuring how long it took for water to reach a certain mark, they could track time even on cloudy days. One royal decree even included specific penalties for scribes who tampered with the drip rate. Let the water speak true, the king allegedly warned.
No pressure.
You pass a sundial-shaped stone, though technically it's a shadow clock, since it's the absence of light that really does the measuring. The gnomon, that little upright nub casting its lazy shadow, points just off-center. That tells you the season's begun to shift.
Spring to summer. Crops to harvest.
One merchant leans against it, chewing a fig and squinting. Half past mid-morning, he mutters, and promptly begins haggling over goat cheese. You pause at a small shrine to Shamash, god of the sun and justice. A man nearby pours out an offering, oil thick and shimmering. He says it's to thank the god for marking the days cleanly. A strange thing to thank a deity for, you might think.
But not here.
Not when so much depends on the tilt of a shadow, the pause of the moon, the stillness before dawn. And speaking of stillness, the city itself obeys the tempo set by these clocks and calendars. Workers gather when the sun is 2 fingers high, break at its zenith, and return as it dips behind the western gates. Temple rituals echo the same cadence, and even punishments, yes, those too, are timed. One inscription reads, "Let the guilty sit 3 full shadows in the square, to consider his folly." A poetic way of saying, sit in timeout until late afternoon.
The hours stretch on.
You find yourself back on a rooftop, not the one from earlier, but one just like it. Another observer stands watch. He's older, robes a little too big, eyes sharpened by years of peering at pinpricks of light. You ask him how he knows when to mark the tablets. He smiles and points to his own skin.
I feel it, he says. In the breed, in the bones. Then he chuckles.
Also, the rooster usually beats me to it. Him how long he's been tracking the stars. He doesn't look away from the sky. Just lifts a hand and points. Since Anu first hung that one there, he says, nodding toward a flickering dot near the eastern horizon. It's poetic nonsense, of course, but it carries the weight of quiet pride. You settle beside him. The rooftop is cool beneath you, the clay still radiating a soft trace of the sun's warmth. He speaks slowly, like he's trying not to scare the stars off. You know, he begins, when Venus disappears for a week, we don't panic anymore. We just write it down. Wait. She always comes back. Usually grumpy. He chuckles, the sound somewhere between a sigh and a creaking door hinge. The sky above is a velvet quilt, stitched with tiny flames. The old man unfurls a tablet, its surface glinting faintly in the torchlight. The cuneiform is dense, layered. This one's not about taxes or goat theft, it's a star chart. He traces a column with his finger. Here's how we knew when to expect the rains last year.
The dog star blinkt 3 nichts in Aro, 10 noting.
Sure enough, 3 weeks later, mud from here to you are. And that's the strange, mesmerizing thing, it works. Not always perfectly, not in a way that would satisfy your modern app-toting meteorologist, but often enough to build a calendar on.
To plan a festival. To plant lentils. To flee a flood.
Historians still argue whether the Babylonians truly understood what they were observing, planetary motion, lunar eclipses, retrograde cycles, or if they were simply following patterns by rote, like someone baking a cake from a recipe written in another language. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. They were meticulous pattern recognizers. Maybe not physicists in the modern sense, but far more precise than their sandals and reed styluses might suggest. The priest gestures to a line of symbols and mutters, "This one here. That's how we marked the day Bel's statue went missing." You blink. It disappeared?
For a while, he says. Storm, probably. Or a clumsy porter. He shrugs.
We read the sky and decided it was fine to keep the temple closed for 7 days.
Just in case.
It wasn't only celestial patterns they charted. They mapped omens too. A goat born with 3 legs?
Into the tablet.
A merchant sneezing precisely as the moon rose?
Tablet.
Fish swimming backwards during a solar eclipse? Triple tablet, filed under urgent. Every anomaly was recorded, as if the universe itself were constantly whispering secrets, provided you knew how to listen.
You glance down to the streets.
Even in the quiet hours, a few shapes drift between torchlit alleys. A baker preparing for dawn.
Agat, stretching Stifflex.
Time moves here, not in minutes, but in moments.
In rituals. In shadows.
You ask how they synchronized it all. The moon phases, the market days, the temple festivals.
Intercalation, the priest replies. Big word.
Means we sneak in an extra month when things get messy. Babylonian calendars didn't always play nice with the seasons, so every few years, they'd toss in a bonus month like a forgotten sock in the laundry. Keeps the barley happy, he explains. Keeps the scribes grumpy. It's the ancient version of a leap year, except you don't get a nice, tidy February 29th. You get an entire new month named Secondulyalu, or Extra Adaru. Imagine writing that on your taxes. And while this might sound chaotic, it was handled with surprising care. The king often consulted the astronomer priests before declaring an intercalation. It wasn't just about the math, it was about the mood of the heavens. 1 month too early, and you might offend Marduk.
Von Tolate, and the river nicht float at the wrong time.
Crops could fail. Spirits could sulk. Or, worst of all, festival snacks could arrive unfashionably off-season. You lean back and try to spot the moon. It's not there tonight, hiding perhaps or busy elsewhere. That too will go on a tablet.
Invisible moon. The priest mutters. 5th night.
Omen, delay journey, avoid lawsuits. The idea that time could be read from the sky might seem odd now. But to the Babylonians, the stars weren't just dots, they were a divine ledger. The heavens kept score.
And you?
You were just trying not to mess up the bookkeeping. As you listen, the city seems to shift around you. Not physically, but in rhythm. You realize how every detail, the clatter of pottery, the calls from distant courtyards, the quiet drip of water from a jar spout, is synced to a cosmic beat.
And suddenly, the universe feels less chaotic.
Still confusing, sure. But measured.
Gentle. Like a lullaby written in light and shadow.
The old man yawns, patting the tablet with one palm. That's enough stars for tonight, he murmurs.
Even the goats blink. You don't argue.
Sky wasn't just a place for pretty lights and passing clouds. It was a vast, divine ledger. Every twinkle, every darkened phase, every strange alignment, it was all part of a celestial correspondence. And reading it correctly wasn't just helpful, it was essential. Your crops, your marriage, even your toenail fungus might hinge on whether Jupiter happened to be visible on the same night as a full moon. As you stroll away from the temple rooftop, the priest gives you a tired wave, and you begin wandering the narrower alleys of the city, where the scent of sesame oil clings to the walls and stray cats loiter like judgmental gods. You pass by a clay tablet shop, a surprisingly ordinary thing in a place like this. Stacks of half-dried records line the ledges, and a boy outside stamps wedge marks into fresh mud with mechanical precision.
You pause to watch.
Tax records? You ask. No, the boy says without looking up.
Lunar tables.
We're behind again. Apparently, even in Babylon, deadlines are a universal constant. It's here, among the quiet workers and dusty records, that the reality of Babylonian timekeeping settles in. It wasn't some lofty scholarly pursuit, it was infrastructure. You needed timekeeping to irrigate fields, to staff the temple, to figure out when it was okay to yell at your neighbor for eating the sacred figs too early. The idea of days as equal units didn't really exist. Instead, daylight was divided into 12 parts, and so was the night. Which means, yes, your hour changed length depending on the season. A summer hour might stretch luxuriously, a winter hour, blink and you'd miss it. It's wildly inconvenient. And yet, oddly elegant. You get the same number of hours in the sun whether it's July or December. Historians still debate whether this division was primarily religious, agricultural, or just a clever way to balance labor shifts. Probably all three. Babylonian society didn't really believe in separating the sacred from the practical. They even had specialized timekeepers. No, not people with fancy water clocks, though those existed too, but watchers. Literally, night watchmen who counted their shift by the setting of stars. When the eagle star is at your elbow, you go wake Marduk's man, a grizzled fellow tells you as he sharpens a bronze blade that's seen far too many pigeon thieves.
If you fall asleep, you will miss a scorpion's tail.
Then you'll be in real trouble. He doesn't specify what kind. You decide not to ask. And yes, water clocks. One of the few technological marvels they didn't borrow from neighbors, the Babylonians developed a kind of rudimentary clepsydra, a bowl with a hole, slowly emptying as time passed. It's more symbolic than surgical, but for keeping ritual time, it did the trick. especially when paired with a priest who had the patience of a brick and the bladder of a camel. You're led into a dim chamber where one such bowl still sits, stained from decades, maybe centuries, of use. It drips with glacial rhythm, each drop a heartbeat in clay. Watching it is hypnotic, but also a little anxiety-inducing. You feel like something important should be happening with every splash. But all that happens is another drop.
And another. And another.
This isn't time as a commodity. It's not something to be saved or lost or wasted.
It's just there. Like wind. Or moss.
Or that odd relative who always shows up half an hour late and blames traffic, even though he lives 2 streets over. The keepers of time weren't just astronomers and priests. Farmers, scribes, builders, all of them needed to understand the calendar, or at least obey it. Markets opened on designated days, not just whenever someone felt like selling turnips. The king's proclamations often referenced celestial signs. Even military campaigns, those grueling affairs of blood and sand, began not when logistics were ready, but when the heavens gave a nudge. And if the stars were unclear? You guessed it, delay everything. It was a world of bureaucratic astrology. Imagine trying to plan your cousin's wedding reception around the position of Mars. Yet, there's a rhythm to it all.
Aslo, careful sync between earth and sky.
It's easy to mock now, with your wristwatches and atomic clocks. But the Babylonians lived in tune with things you've forgotten how to notice. The subtle lengthening of a shadow.
The softness of pre-dawn light. The moment when birds stop chirping and crickets begin. As you exit the chamber of dripping time, you step into the edge of morning.
A pink blush cracks open the eastern sky, and the shadows are back, those same shadows that started this whole journey. Longer now, stretched like yawned-out memories across the dusty courtyard.
Somione somewere strikes abel.
Probably not because it's 6 o'clock, but because the light hit a certain column just right. That's how it worked here.
That's how time flowed.
Not in numbers, but in nudges. The gold-tinged hush of twilight creeping across mud-brick rooftops. The moment when birds go quiet, and even the river seems to hold its breath. You find yourself wandering through the fields on the city's outskirts now, beyond the walls where farmers kneel between stalks of barley and boys chase goats with dubious authority. The sky is broad here, kind of open that makes your neck ache from looking up. And it's from these fields, not the towers or temples, that Babylon's grand understanding of time quietly grew roots. A farmer scratches his head with a dirt-crusted hand and gestures to a squat marker stone stuck deep into the soil. Shadow hits this line, I know it's halfway to market time. No sand-filled hourglass, no ticking mechanism, just sun, stone, and muscle memory. This is where shadow casting became more than a casual observation.
It became system.
Farmers used their own bodies, staffs, and sticks, jabbed into the dirt like sundial spears, to create crude but effective solar timers.
The trick?
You don't measure time like we do. You measure movement.
The way the tip of our shadows links eastward, longer and thinner, until it barely touches the mark you carved yesterday. That's your sign. Time to water the beans.
It's practical, sure. But it's also poetic. Each person, in a way, had their own sundial, personalized and local. No need for standardization when everyone's tuned to their own sliver of the world.
Still, the elite craved precision.
Royal scribes, for instance, didn't care if your bean plants were thirsty. They cared about lunar eclipses, coronation omens, and the correct hour for sacrificing a goat to the moon goddess. For them, shadow measurements were recorded, compared, and filed away in archives so vast and meticulous, you'd swear Babylon was more obsessed with paperwork than with empire. There's even evidence that mobile sundials existed, flat panels etched with angles, carried in travel packs like divine spreadsheets. Historians still debate whether these were widespread tools or status symbols for astronomically inclined nobles. Either way, it's oddly charming to imagine a Babylonian bureaucrat whipping out his personalized shadow plate like a solar-powered calculator. And remember those ziggurat staircases? Turns out, some scholars believe they were used as calibration platforms. Stand on the right step, at the right hour, and your shadow would land squarely on a predetermined notch. Miss it and, well, back to shadow school. But there was a catch.
Shadows don't play nice on cloudy days.
And Babylon did occasionally experience enough dust storms and winter haze to make reliable readings tricky.
What then?
You guessed it, cross-reference. Water clocks, star charts, and sheer priestly gut instinct came into play. Some priests claimed to sense time in their bones. Others probably just had very consistent breakfasts. One fragment from a cuneiform tablet mentions the hour when Ishtar's gate glows gold, which is either poetic genius or Babylon's earliest recorded case of urban light pollution. Even in the countryside, shadow play wasn't just practical. It held ritual significance. You meet an old woman grinding lentils in the shade of a fig tree. She tells you the story of a god who once chased his own shadow across the desert, mistaking it for a rival. He walked forever, she says, until he forgot who he was. Then she offers you a lentil cake that tastes like regret and sesame. As you rest beneath that same fig tree, you begin to feel the tug of Babylonian time. Not the relentless tick-tock of minutes, but something slower, wider, more circular. Like a tide that rises in light, crests in shadow, and slips away with the stars. You notice how your own shadow has shifted, subtly, like a cat repositioning itself in sleep. It now brushes against the hem of your robe, a silent signal that something is changing.
Not urgent. Just expected.
Some scholars argue that the Babylonians' entire view of life was shaped by these rhythms, that their myths, economies, and even justice systems pulsed in harmony with sun and shadow.
It wasn't superstition.
It was literacy of the world around them. And unlike modern timekeeping, with its cold digital beeps, Babylon's system was sensual.
You felt time. On your skin. Unter your toes.
In the way birds flitted differently at dawn than at dusk. In the warmth of a stone that spent the day drinking sun.
The day winds down now.
In the far distance, someone begins a low song, wordless, but steady. A farmer calling his oxen home, or a priest intoning the night prayer.
Hard to say.
But it blends with the rustling barley, the hush of wind, and the gentle scuff of your own feet tracing invisible lines across the earth. Time, in Babylon, wasn't a cage.
It was a conversation. Between humans and stars. Between shadows and Klee. Between the now and Warteverkehr before.
Words you can't quite make out, floating in the breeze like forgotten incense. You're not sure if it's a prayer, a lullaby, or just someone scolding their goat in a very melodic way. Either way, it blends perfectly with the setting sun. The light is golden now, liquid amber pouring across the landscape, casting long thin shadows that stretch and yawn like tired gods. You find yourself drifting back toward the edge of the city, to a courtyard dotted with quiet observers. These aren't priests or scholars. They're just people, mothers cradling sleepy toddlers, old men sharpening reeds, teenagers pretending not to care about anything at all. And all of them, in their own way, are watching the sky. Because while sundials and shadow sticks told you the hours, it was the stars that truly revealed the shape of time. When the sun dipped low enough, the stars would bloom, first in ones and twos, then suddenly in great spills of constellations. Babylonian star charts weren't decorations.
They were tools.
Instruments of divination, yes, but also deeply practical calendars. You tilt your head back and start to recognize the patterns. Plough, creeping in from the east. The scales, just barely visible over the rooftops. And there, twinkling with quiet arrogance, sits the bow, an ancient form of Sagittarius, ready to fire an arrow straight through the night. Historians still argue whether these constellations were purely symbolic or if they were ever used for precise navigation. What we do know, they were named, tracked, and revered. Babylonian astronomers logged their appearances with a dedication that would make modern data scientists weep. The mul.appin, a tablet dating from around 1000 BCE, is essentially the ultimate sky manual. It lists when stars rise and set throughout the year, predicts eclipses, even gives you tips on which constellations are good omens for planting onions.
Okay, maybe not onions. But close.
The thing is, Babylonians didn't separate astronomy from astrology. The sky wasn't just a science, it was a personality.
It talked.
You just had to know how to listen. A flicker near the horizon catches your eye. Venus, called the morning and evening star, has begun her slow ascent. In Babylon, Venus wasn't just a planet. She was Ishtar, goddess of war and love, chaos and fertility. Seeing her rise at twilight was more than beautiful.
It was an announcement.
Something was about to shift.
Possibly your crops.
Possibly your marriage. Possibly your entire understanding of fate. And right then, a woman nearby spits into the dust and mutters, "Ishtar brings rain or war. Never tea." You're not sure if that's an old proverb or just her personal beef with planetary deities.
Still, she has a point.
These celestial cycles weren't simply observed, they were absorbed. Your life was entwined with them. The calendar itself was lunar, with months beginning at the sighting of the new moon. But moon sightings aren't always consistent. So occasionally, priests would declare, surprise,
bonus month.
And suddenly, it was like Babylonian leap year, except with more goat sacrifices and fewer spreadsheets. The decision to insert an extra month was not casual. It was debated, argued, lobbied for.
Farmers wanted one thing.
temple officials another. And somewhere in the middle, a royal astrologer probably just wanted to go home early.
Imagine the chaos when the stars didst behave.
When Mars lingered too long in the same patch of sky. Or when a solar eclipse arrived uninvited.
Panic. Adjustments. Rituals.
Maybe even exile, if someone was blamed for angering the heavens. And yet, amidst this delicate dance of light and omen, a quiet kind of genius flourished. Babylonian astronomers eventually developed the ability to predict lunar eclipses with eerie precision. Using something called the Saros cycle, an 18-year pattern, they marked the return of celestial events with accuracy that wouldn't be matched until medieval Europe.
You lean back on the warm stone and trace one constellation with your fingertip.
It's oddly comforting, knowing that someone thousands of years ago did the exact same thing from the same spot.
Same stars.
Same questions. Different sandals. Night has truly fallen now, and with it, a softness settles over the city.
The sounds change.
The clatter of carts gives way to murmured prayers, soft laughter, the clink of water jars being filled for tomorrow's sunrise.
And up over it all, the stars keep time.
Not like your clocks do, mechanical, merciless, insistent, but slowly. Gently.
Like a breed.
But in their own ancient rhythm, both precise and poetic.
They do not tick, they shimmer. They do not chime, they beckon.
You lie back fully now, your head against cool stone, the desert breeze tugging gently at your hair like a tired uncle trying to get your attention for one last story. You're watching the sky the way the Babylonians did, not as entertainment, not even as science, but as memory. Every light above you is a page in a book they'd already read 1,000 times.
And you? Jure a late coma, barely catching up on chapter 1.
Tonight, let's talk about how those stars weren't just floating in the sky, they were keeping tabs on you. Well, not you exactly, but anyone who ever had a job, a farm, a sick kid, or a king to impress. Because the sky in Babylon was the ultimate civil servant. It scheduled your taxes, your temple festivals, your grain harvests.
And yes, your birthday party.
Assuming the moon approved. But here's the twist. Babylonian time wasn't static.
It flexed.
It moved with shadows during the day, and it danced with stars at night.
You didn't own time. You watched it. You waited for it.
And sometimes, when the gods felt generous, you borrowed it. Take the 3 watches of the night. A beautiful little timekeeping invention you wish modern hotels would bring back. Instead of hours, Babylonians divided the night into thirds. The first watch, roughly from sunset to moonrise, was for winding down. The second, from moonrise to midheaven, was for deep sleep and prophetic dreams. The third, from midheaven to dawn, was for prayers, secret meetings, or, as some texts suggest, just staring at the ceiling wondering why the moon looks like a biscuit tonight.
And these watches?
They weren't even based on a set number of hours. They changed depending on the season. Longer nights meant longer watches. In the summer, you barely got a second one in before the rooster ruined everything. Historians still argue whether these watches were observed by everyone or only by the temple elite. Clues from letters and administrative records hint that even regular folks kept track in their own way. A mother might hush her child by saying, "Sleep, sleep until the second watch." A guard might report an incident happened just before the third. And then there were the night priests. Imagine being tasked with watching the sky, not to learn it, but to listen to it. To wake the sleeping city if something looked wrong. A red moon, a wandering star, a flash of light that shouldn't be there.
These weren't just curiosities. They were omens.
The kind that got people promoted.
Or exiled. Or both.
You wonder what they looked like, those priests.
Cloaked? Bleary-eyed?
Whispering to each other as they passed a flask of barley beer back and forth. Did they grumble about the cold? Complain that Venus was late again? And what about the stars they named but didn't fully understand? The constellations that came and went with the seasons, appearing only briefly before vanishing like polite guests. Did they miss them? Or did they assume they'd always return, like stubborn relatives or taxes? By now, the stars above you seem brighter. You swear you can see the Milky Way stretch its silver scarf across the heavens. You blink slowly and begin to imagine that scarf falling, gently, covering the city in velvet darkness. Everyone tucked in.
The goats full of wine.
The sheep finally asleep. And you, wrapped in time not made of seconds but of stars. You shift slightly, adjusting your position on the stone. It's still warm from the day's heat, but cooling quickly.
Some wäre far off, a doc bags ons, ten noting. The längse, deep and sincere. This the längse?
It was the backdrop for thousands of tiny moments that once mattered desperately to someone. A farmer counting the minutes until he could water his fields. A young lover trying to calculate how long she had before dawn.
A trader praying for just a little more moonlight before the bandits caught up.
And now you lie here in the ruins of it all, and it's still beautiful. Still full of answers written in a language you don't fully speak, but desperately want to understand. Just remember, the Babylonians didn't try to master time. They befriended it. Coexisted with it. Watched its moods and patterns the way you might watch a cat that sometimes brings gifts and sometimes scratches your sofa. And in return, time whispered back. Not in hours or minutes, but in the slow, steady turning of the sky.
You breathe in. Slow. Deep.
The kind of breath that fills your chest with something ancient and unnamed. And just as you exhale, a shooting star darts overhead, brief and cheeky.
Like a wink from the past.
The watching, they found comfort. Maybe that's what draws you to this story. Not the science, not the systems, but the gentle intimacy between humans and a sky that was never quite theirs, but always somehow listening. You stretch slightly, still lying back in that soft, imagined dust.
The sky doesn't move any faster for you.
It glides above, quiet and ancient, with the same unhurried confidence it showed the Babylonians nearly 4,000 years ago. And so, tonight, we look up with them. Let's say it's around 600 BCE. Babylon is a city of ziggurats, dusty courtyards, and lamplit libraries. You're perched on the rooftop of a middle-tier scribe's house, someone important enough to own a second cushion, but not important enough to dine with priests. The city below is alive but muted.
No shooting. No markets.
Just footsteps in the dust, a few dogs arguing over a broken fig, and the low hum of temple hymns carried by the breeze. You lean on the edge, and there it is, the shadow clock. It's no longer casting shadows, of course, the sun's long gone. But you see its outline etched into the stone.
12 wedges like slices of time P. Simple. Elegant.
Surprisingly accurate. If the sun had the courtesy to stay in the same place all year. This one belongs to the scribe's uncle. He's obsessed with it. Trims the gnomon weekly. Polishes the lines with crushed date seeds. Swears by its accuracy, though he's usually late for everything. Shadow clocks like this were common, especially in upper-class homes and temple courtyards. A vertical stick, called a gnomon, stood upright in a prepared surface. As the sun moved, the stick's shadow crept along the lines carved into stone or drawn on compact clay tablets. By comparing the length and direction of the shadow, the Babylonians could tell not only the hour, but even the season. Longer shadows meant winter was crawling in.
Shorter ones?
Time to harvest barley and start worrying about taxes. Here's the thing though, these clocks weren't standardized. Your neighbor's gnomon might give you a whole different reading. The angle mattered. The latitude mattered. Even the time of year made a difference. It was less like checking your phone and more like interpreting your cat's mood. You needed context, intuition, and ideally a backup plan. Historians still argue whether these devices were calibrated with any mathematical rigor or if they were more ceremonial than practical. What's clear is that they meant something deep and cultural.
A way to see time, not just feel it.
And in a world without alarms, that mattered. There's even evidence that Babylonians used portable versions, small clay discs that could be tilted and adjusted.
You imagine slipping one into your robe before a trip, like ancient Google Maps for sunlight.
Perhaps you'd show it off at roadside inns, bragging to other travelers about your limited edition Ishtar model. But the real magic happened when shadow clocks worked in tandem with water clocks.
You remember Tose, don't you?
Those slow-dripping, gurgling little machines we talked about earlier? Combine the two, and suddenly you had a full day's coverage, sun by day, water by night.
The first true 24-hour surveillance system. Minus the creepy part.
So picture it, a priest consulting both clocks before entering the temple. Cross-referencing water drops with sunlight angles. Whispering a silent confirmation that the gods wouldn't mind if the offerings were 5 minutes late.
And you?
You're still watching that rooftop clock. It's just a stone circle now, lifeless in the dark. But you know it'll come back to life tomorrow, and the next day and the next, so long as the sun keeps showing up.
The idea zoos you.
Time, to the Babylonians, wasn't something they told. It was something they observed.
Carefully.
Respectfully. Like a wild animal that might flee if you looked too eager. And you get it. You've had days like that, haven't you? When the hours slipped past unnoticed, and only the light told you it was getting late. When you watched shadows stretch across your room like lazy cats, and you didn't reach for your phone, not yet. You just watched. And waited. And felt, somehow, part of something older.
Now, lying beneath that deep violet sky, You let the memory fade. The rooftop dissolves. The city recedes.
All that remains is the sensation of drifting, slowly, purposefully, through layers of shadow and light. Above you, the stars continue their quiet sweep, measuring out the hours the only way they know how.
And you?
You're starting to measure your own breath in time with them.
Slower. Softer. Safe.
Gently, like the long shadow of a gnomon sliding over sun-warmed stone. You're not entirely sure where you are now. Babylon has faded into a hum, its ziggurats replaced by sand dunes, its voices tucked away behind the soft rustle of wind.
But that's all right.
Time is moving differently here, as it did for the Babylonians when night settled in and clocks, whether shadowed or dripping, finally paused. Now you're in a small inner chamber, part archive, part observatory, part mystical snack bar, if the sesame cakes you smell are any clue. You're lying on a woven mat, a little too short for your legs, but the woven reeds creak comfortingly beneath you. There's a soft amber glow from a lantern fueled by sesame oil. It flickers just enough to mimic a sleepy campfire, and the walls around you are lined with clay tablets.
Hundreds of them.
Each etched with tiny wedge-shaped impressions, cuneiform. Some hold myths, others equations. But a whole corner is devoted to timekeeping. One tablet catches your eye. It's cracked along the bottom, missing a chunk, but still legible.
You lean closer, squinting.
It's a timetable for temple rituals. Columns list times of day, though not 10 a.m. or 3:15 p.m. No, these entries say things like when the sun touches the upper lintel or as the last shadow kisses the west gate. Poetry disguised as precision. And that was the Babylonian brilliance. Rather than fight nature to carve time into sharp, predictable blocks, they wrapped their timekeeping around nature's rhythms.
A fluid clock. An obedient sky.
You're handed a tablet, gently, by someone you never noticed entering. They don't speak, but you feel a kind of mutual drowsy respect.
You turn the clay in your hand. It's cool.
Heavier than it looks. This one shows something unexpected, a schedule not for ceremonies or chores, but for napping.
Yes, napping.
The Babylonians, it seems, valued daytime sleep. Scholars call it segmented sleep, and there's debate over whether it was a cultural staple or just a practical response to heat. Regardless, here it is in dusty clay, time slots for rest between sunrise prayers and midday counting rituals. Sleep wasn't a luxury, it was a scheduled, sacred act. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep mirrored our modern power naps, or if it followed a pattern tied to the city's water distribution or even the scribes' tea breaks. Well, beer breaks, more likely. But the evidence suggests that structured rest was respected, if not envied. This makes you feel oddly validated. You glance up at the quiet stranger again, but they've vanished, like time itself. And now, the chamber itself begins to dissolve. You're floating again, upward, not with speed, but with that lazy upward drift of a dandelion seed on warm air. Tablets crumble below you into dust. The lantern light shrinks into a dot. And above you, stars begin to appear.
Bricht. Ancient. Arranged. Ah, the stars. You land softly. Baref out, on a wide, flat terrace near the top of a ziggurat. The wind is cool, and you pull a robe closer.
Before you, a priest astronomer adjusts a bronze sighting rod. Beside him, a small shadow clock is mounted in a stone basin. He glances at you, nods.
Points upward. And you look. Orion, almost unschanget. A familiar friend.
But beside it, strange configurations. The furrow of Ea, the true shepherd of Anu, the old man Babylonian constellations tied not to mythic drama, but to seasonal planting, flooding, and trade. Every night, these stars helped measure time, not just hours but months. Babylonians didn't just track stars, they charted lunar phases, planetary motion, even eclipses. Their calendar? Based on lunar cycles, interwoven with the solar year by a system of corrections so precise it would make modern tax accountants weep with joy. And they logged it all.
Over centuries.
In libraries. The most famous of these, Ashurbanipal's library in Nineveh, would one day give archaeologists nearly everything we know about Babylonian astronomy. The ziggurat beneath you hums with that invisible electricity of knowledge not yet forgotten. And above, the stars keep turning, methodical and unhurried. Time here is no longer a tool, it's a companion.
An old one. A gentle one.
You let out a breath you didn't know you'd been holding. And far below, someone's shadow shifts on a courtyard wall. Friend that walks beside you, never ahead or behind, simply pacing your steps in the dark. The wind brushes gently past your cheek as you remain seated atop the ziggurat. It carries the scent of baked brick and cooling dust, mingled with something else, maybe jasmine or tamarisk. It's difficult to be sure. Time, after all, has dulled your senses here, or perhaps it simply lulled them into a slower rhythm. You watch as the priest astronomer completes his final adjustments. He doesn't seem in a hurry. None of them ever are. There's a quiet understanding among Babylonian stargazers that nothing truly important can be rushed, especially not time. A little farther along the terrace, you notice a small gathering. Scribes, a few noblemen, even a curious child with eyes as wide as Saturn's rings. They're huddled around a flat board where another shadow clock lies, this one lit faintly by moonlight. No sun to cast a proper shadow, of course, but they're measuring something else. Perhaps the shadow of Venus? You remember reading somewhere that Venus was particularly beloved here. Called the bright queen of the sky, she had her own rituals, her own dedicated time slots on the temple schedule. Some tablets even recorded her strange path across the night with such precision, modern astronomers still double-check their own charts against it. Historians still argue whether this celestial obsession stemmed from agriculture, religion, or a royal astrologer with too much free time. But what's certain is this: the Babylonians didn't just track time. They communed with it. They listened to its rhythms, studied its quirks, folded it into their every waking and sleeping moment. Down in the city, the fires have dimmed.
Most windows are dark.
You hear the low murmur of late-night guards, the soft bleating of a restless goat, the creak of a reed gate swaying open for a night traveler. And just then, you remember the water clocks.
Yes, the clepsydras.
You never saw one, but you heard about them. Clay jars with small holes, steadily dripping water into another vessel.
Time made liquid.
The perfect tool for cloudy days, for moonlit temple ceremonies, for measuring intervals when even stars were shy. Some say priests guarded them jealously, fearing misuse. Others claim the jars were communal, left out in public squares like sundials, though less reliable if a thirsty dog got involved. Either way, the clepsydra was quiet, constant. You imagine its slow drip matching the beat of your own heart now.
The Großkühler.
Your robe does little to block it, but you don't mind. Your body has adjusted. Or perhaps it's forgotten how discomfort feels. You lie back, gazing skyward. The stars above are clearer than ever, like tiny inscriptions on a heavenly tablet. You try to trace the outlines, the field, the scimitar, the swallow. Each one a clock in its own way. Each one marking a moment, a ritual, a season, a life. And now, time begins to fold.
Not fast. Not jarring. Just folding.
Gently, like the pages of a book closing on their own. You find yourself drifting downward, past the ziggurats' tiers, past the empty market stalls, past the shadow of that oddly shaped gnomon from hours ago. Everything softens. The bricks blur, the torches dim, the sounds become a single, low lullaby.
Therese no final revelation. No grand conclusion.
Only this: the Babylonians didn't chase time. They aligned themselves with it, studied its moods, slept in its arms.
And so can you. Take one last breath.
Let it go. Listen, very carefully, and you might still hear the drip of a water clock somewhere, or the whisper of a priest's robe brushing past sun-warmed stone.
The shadow moves slowly.
Always has. Always will. Now close your eyes. Let the stars keep watch.